Our speaker tonight is also one of our wonderful workshop educators. It's Dr. Reid. He teaches plant identification courses to build botanical skills and expand ecological awareness at the School of Renewable Natural Resources at LSU. Chris is one of our favorite workshop educators. He spent last Saturday with us at the North Lake Nature Center teaching us to look at trees. He's particularly interested in grasses and sedges with a recent focus on conservation of Louisiana's coastal prairie. His work includes research on the flora and vegetation of prairie remnants and application of stewardship actions such as prescribed burning and chemical and mechanical control of encroaching brush. Welcome, Chris, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you for the kind and generous introduction. Okay, the subject I'm going to talk to you about is dichotomous keys, but I'm going to be coming at this from a different angle than you might think. So dichotomous keys are tools that have been around for several hundred years. They are tools that enable people to identify things, whether they be biological organisms, rocks. You could apply this to just about anybody. So what we're going to actually be doing, and this presentation is going to be more interactive than just me babbling. We're going to actually construct a dichotomous key to a small selection of local woody plants. So, so the objectives here, we're going to first talk about character matrices. So we're going to learn how to organize a character matrix, and this is going to help us organize information about the traits or attributes of a group of organisms. So we'll learn about a character matrix, and then before we actually construct the key, I'll go over the structure. But by the end, if you weren't already familiar with dichotomous keys, I hope that you'll have a good grasp on the structure and operation of a dichotomous key. So some of you have probably used keys to various groups of organisms. In the plant world, we have some regional resources that are really good, like, for example, Godfrey and Wooten's Aquatic and Wetland Plants to the Southeast. You pick up that 2-volume set and you flip them open, you're going to find a lot of, you're going to find technical descriptions of families, genera, and species, and you're also going to find a number of dichotomous keys. So understanding the basics of dichotomous key operation is obviously a prerequisite to pick up a resource like that and be successful. There's another aspect to actually using a real key, and they're going to works like Godfrey and Wooten. They're going to treat hundreds to maybe even thousands of taxa, and they're also going to be there's a lot of technical language, so you have to have a good grasp on plant morphology. Now, if it makes anybody feel better, I still, after 20 years of keying, I have to look at the glossary too quite a bit. So some keys, it seems like they go out of their way to be extra technical. But anyway, so there's using real live keys. What we're going to actually do is take a small pool of taxa, organize some information about those taxa, and construct a key. And what I like about this exercise is that it's a really good learning tool. First of all, doing what we're going to do is going to force us to take a close look at the different traits of the organisms, of the species that we're going to treat. So we have to study the plants and know some of the morphology. Also, going through an exercise like this, and even scaling it up for larger groups of taxa, if you want to do that on your own, it forces you also to, when you're making identifications, to be more to make evidence-based identifications. I always tell my students, I want you to make evidence-based decisions. So if you're going to state that a particular plant is, this particular species, let's just say deciduous holly or something like that. I want to know why is it deciduous holly? What's your evidence? What traits make it deciduous holly and not something else? So the alternative to making a more structured evidence-based decision is what's referred to as the Gestalt method. So with the Gestalt approach to identifying plants or anything, you have a visual search image in mind. And when you're in the field and you encounter that search image, then you apply that name that fits the search image. So it's something, the Gestalt method, or what I often refer to as simply the eyeball method. We all do it, and it certainly has its place in the work we do, the biology. But especially when you don't have a good grip on the flora, or you're just starting out in your training, there you can get fooled pretty easily. So if you have a visual search image that you're looking for that belongs to a certain species, you can make misidentifications. If you encounter, for example, a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a variation within that same species that you're not accustomed to, that can throw you off. I remember one time, so loblolly pine, really probably the most abundant pine in the Southeast. I remember a long time ago, I went to another part of its range in northern Alabama, and I had to stand around and scratch my head because I was applying that eyeball method, and it just didn't look like what I was used to seeing down here. It was the same species, no doubt. So there are a lot of look-alike species, so species that are superficially similar to one another, but if you look really closely, are really different. So we have 3 examples right here: Royal Paullinia, or Empress tree, they call it, Southern Catalpa, and paper mulberry, which all have, generally, ovate to heart-shaped leaves, but they're way different species, and they're not even closely related. So the process of what we're going to go through, building a character matrix and writing a dichotomous key, will help us with getting in that more of a, I guess, a scientific framework for making decisions. The way a dichotomous key operates, I'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, so that's our objective here. So a couple of terms that I'm going to throw out to you. You're going to taxonomists use these terms a lot. So character and character state. So a character is any aspect of a plant, also just simply a trait. And a character state is the expression of that character. And I'll have an example on the next slide, but just to throw out a really easy one, something like petal color. That's the character, and then the different expressions or character states might be white, pink, yellow, etc. So characters, I'll show you a matrix in a minute, but characters can be discrete, like white, pink, yellow, etc. Another example of a discrete character would be presence absence. So presence absence, or it can be continuous or quantitative. For example, leaf measurements. Let's say leaf length. So your taxonomist goes into a herbarium and looks at 100 specimens of a given species, takes a representative leaf and measures one representative leaf on each of those 100 specimens, and you have a range. It might be from 2.2 centimeters to 2.9 centimeters. And that's a continuous character. All right, so just getting back to the character state idea, leaf arrangement is a good example. So leaf arrangement's a character, and you have 3 character states: alternate, opposite, and world. Right. So this is an example of a character matrix that I kind of did for some of our woody vines. So a character matrix is simply a table where we have the taxa in a column, characters across in the top row, and then we have a number of cells. We have a cell for each character for each species, and a completed character matrix. All the cells will be filled in by character states. So with woody vines, So with woody vines, we have poison ivy, Virginia creeper, one of the greenbriers, trumpet creeper, etc. So when it comes to woody vines, the characters that I kind of thought would provide some meaningful variation are climbing method, whether it's aerial roots, twining, tendrils, etc. Some of these species, well, actually just one, greenbrier, is armed. So when I say armed, we're talking about possessing spines, prickles, or thorns. Leaf arrangement, which is probably the best frontline character when you're making decisions. So we have some variation here. 3 of these taxa, 3 of these vines have alternate arrangement and 2 have opposite. Leaf complexity, whether or not the blade is split or dissected into more than one continuous unit. So simple versus various flavors of compound. And then the fruit type, which of course fruit is something that's, that evidence is only available. The availability of fruit, of course, depends on season and opportunity. So we have everything from dry drupes and poison ivy, coupled with berries, trumpet creeper, and everything else in the family that includes catalpa and all that have capsules. And then Japanese honeysuckle also has a berry. So this is an example of a character matrix. And the point of a character matrix, and just to reframe the context here, I'm giving this presentation to help to give you some ideas, because I'm assuming that most of you are interested in learning to identify plants, developing your plant identification skills. So this is an approach that can help you, and the character matrix in particular can help you organize information. If you were to do this with a larger pool of species and put it in Excel, you can do some sorting, you can kind of play around with it, and a little bit of manipulation to help, just simply to help organize and display and take in the information. So that's what a character matrix is. Now, in the vine matrix, all of these characters, we can pretty confidently assign character states or for each of the taxa. Now there are going to be some characters, some features, some traits that might be really species specific. They don't quite apply across the board. You can't really apply that to every species, but that's something to maybe just add a column and put in a notes field and say, okay, if one of these species has some sort of like a business card trait that's really super specific, or just really any observation, or we could add a column here, add a column to the side, and try and code for ecology, for habitat. Now, coding for ecology, that's pretty tricky because there's so much overlap. But anyway, the bottom line, the point of a matrix is to help you organize information. And again, just to reframe, just to reiterate the context here, I advocate this approach because I think, especially, depending on what your skill level is, really at all levels, it's best to make evidence-based decisions. Going back to eyeballing or the Gestalt method, it's something we all do. Some of you probably know plants, some species of plants so well that you don't have to go through some sort of decision process to identify. You can just, bump into it and say, oh, that's that, and you're 100% right. Some species are, drive down the highway at 60 miles an hour, you can identify. But for all others, and again, depending on where you are in your development as a botanist, as a plant identifier, this is a good approach to take. All right, so getting into dichotomous keys, what is a dichotomous key? And I'll show you a few examples. So a dichotomous key is usually a text-based tool, and I underline the word tool because that's what it is. It's a tool for identifying just about anything. Organisms, I remember a few years ago they were doing plant community mapping at Jean Lafitte Preserve, and they actually, the NatureServe and USGS folks actually wrote a dichotomous key to habitats on the preserve. Now it was a lot of overlap and it was not user-friendly, but they at least attempted to write a key for habitats. Not knocking the product, I'm just saying ecology is difficult, but so anything you want to identify. So the word dichotomous, just in a general sense, means forking or splitting into two. So a dichotomous key provides a user a series of choices that oppose each other. So this or that choices. Now, each pair of choices is referred to as a couplet. So if you start off at the beginning of a key, you're going to have two opposing statements. That will be your first couplet, and they will be opposing each other. So this or that. So at that point, you examine your specimen in hand and you say, okay, it's not this, it's that. So there's a little dotted line, it'll tell you where to go from there. So you go to a different part of the key. I'll kind of backfill some of this when I show you some of the examples of dichotomous keys and explain them a little bit. So with this forking pattern, basically you have a pool of species. We're going to deal with 12 species. So each decision, you're going to split that pool into two parts. The first decision, I should say, split it into two. Now those two parts may not be equal in size. We can get into that in a minute. But so it's a series of this or that choices. Every time you make a choice, you've eliminated possibilities. So it has kind of a nice sciencey aspect to it in that regard. And it really, in a way, each choice you make is kind of like a miniature hypothesis test. You're examining evidence. You're making it's kind of like you're making a choice, and depending on whenever you do make a choice, you're eliminating possibilities. So, all right, a little grainy here, but so this is an excerpt from the oak key from the Keys to the Flora of Arkansas. Now, key structure in real life differs a good bit. Most keys are numbered. So I'll draw your attention to this first line, and I'm going to read it out. So leaves entire or essentially sewed, not distinctly toothed or lobed. So this refers mainly to whether or not teeth, the blades are toothed or lobed. Now, that's this. And the second number one, which rounds out the couplet. So we have this, leaves entire, not toothed or lobed, and then that, leaves distinctly toothed or lobed. So in this case, so we have our couplet. Let's say we're looking at water oak or something like that, or willow oak is a really unambiguous one. So we're definitely going to select this. We're going to go to number 2. And then it asks us, number 2, leaves widest above the middle, or leaves widest near the middle or base. So that's pretty straightforward. So if we're looking at willow oak, it's pretty much widest near the middle. Think about Quercus niger and water oak. It's spatulate. It's widest at the apex. Same thing with blackjack, excuse me. So we've selected here. It tells us to go to 2. We've elected to go here, and then we just keep working down. So let's just say we're looking at something like white oak that's obviously lobed. So we're definitely not going to go here. We're going to go down here, leaves distinctly toothed or lobed. So when we made this choice right here, we have eliminated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible taxa. So every time you make a choice, you eliminate possibilities. So that's oaks from Arkansas. I'll show you a couple of other examples. In really big treatments, your regional flora type treatments, you're usually going to start off with a key to major groups. In this case, this is from a dendrology textbook, the key to keys. So there's no numbering, at least in this big key. It's all based on indentation. So our first couplet, plants evergreen versus plants deciduous, etc. So, we're going to get into the evergreens. This is going to lead us down, down the conifer path. So anyway, so this is just another example. All right. So earlier on, I said that a dichotomous key was a text-based resource. It doesn't have to be text-based. It can be, what we have here is, this is called a field key to the hickories of the U.S. And they've kind of got a little bit, there's most of the matter is text-based, but they have some diagrams out to the side. So, referring to the true hickories versus the pecan hickories, where we have terminal bud scales that overlap versus fused on the margin. So it actually, illustrates that. And the types of hairs, so multi-radiate hairs versus unbranched or simple hairs. So you can hybridize that. Some of you may have been thinking when I was explaining the whole dichotomous idea, you might have envisioned in your mind something like a flow chart. So that's certainly a pathway you can take as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. A few years ago, I taught a plant taxonomy course at Northwestern State, and it was kind of suboptimal. I mean, I had to go up there one day a week. I only had one period of time with them. Anyway, I had the students write their own rapid identification field guides, and I actually allowed them to use it on quizzes in the field. And this is just an example. I figured rather than mining something from the web, I would just use a picture of one of my students' field guides. But she has basically leaves opposite simple, alternate simple, and etc. But she has kind of a flow chart look to this. So I don't know if this at all resonates. The handwriting's not very good, but I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that you can develop your own, for your own use, you can develop your own your field guide, and you can add annotations. You can keep modifying. You can start off obviously with the plants and as you learn new species, as you move species from that the pool of the species you don't know across that membrane that is your brain into the pool of species that you do know, you can keep expanding your field guide. When you run into something you don't know, you can revise your personal field guide. So anyway, so this is an example of just a handwritten flowchart method. That's a bit more busy. Obviously this is if you can read your own handwriting, I guess that's all that counts. So, but it's the same process. It's basically a decision tool. All right, and then this is I'll round out with thinking about ecology. So she has everything broken down as a supplement. So she had her little flowchart keys, and then she had that supplemented with by group, shrubs, old home sites, Nandina domestica, although we know it escapes sometimes. But anyway, you can have this as like a supplement if you develop your own personal field guide. All right, so getting into the fun part, this is our pool of species, 12 species. And by the end of this little seminar, we will have generated a dichotomous key to these 12 species. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with these species. I'm going to briefly go through a slide on each species, just giving you some reminders. So I'd recommend that since I can pretty much only share one screen at a time, and I should have said this earlier, but if you have a notebook and a writing implement, you might want to have that at the ready to take a few notes, and also just record information for yourself that you want to either just for yourself, or if you want to just start jotting down ideas and share that later. Because once we get into coding a matrix for these 12 species, then it'll be more interactive, and you can chime in if you want. So these are our 12 taxa. So I'm just going to go through them down the line pretty briefly. Hopefully the next few slides aren't totally old, but anyway. All right, so starting off, bald cypress. This is a rather unique large tree. It's a deciduous conifer. Interestingly, I don't know if y'all really knew this, but each little feather-like structure here is actually not a leaf, but a shoot. And it's technically it's called a determinate short shoot. The leaves themselves are linear, maybe, I don't know, ½ inch or so long, alternately arranged, and they're also two-ranged, disticus. So that's why these short shoots actually look like little feathers, because they lay flat because the leaves are two-ranged rather than multi-ranged. So anyway, deciduous conifer, determinate short shoots, etc. As a conifer, the pollen and seed cones are born on the same tree, so it's monoecious, however you pronounce that. Pollen cones are really small. They preform in the fall, and they're in these little dangling pendant masses. They're referred to as catkins, which is an inflorescence type. It's not a flowering plant, but I guess no law against calling them catkins. Bark varies a good bit, but usually kind of grayish brown on the outside with some reddish undertone, kind of shreddy. And bald cypress is your typical, your quintessential big river swamp species, although you find it on older landscapes along small streams, etc. So that's bald cypress. A couple of pines in the mix here, slash pine. We have 5 pines in Louisiana. There are 2 that have really short needles. By short, I'm looking, like under 4 inches, something like that. Slash pine is one of the longer needle one. Most notably, if you were to sample a slash pine twig, you would probably find combinations of 2 and 3 needles in 2 to 3 per pascal on a given sample branch. Relatively long. The needle length for slash pine overlaps with loblolly, which is on average shorter, and longleaf, which is on average longer, but there's still overlap. Seed cones are really distinctive. They're kind of waxy reddish brown, and they're notably stalked, and that's something you can see from just looking up into a tree crown that they're stalked. In nature, so slash pines actually likes its feet wet. It'll grow anywhere you plant it, wet or dry, but in nature it likes its feet wet, its back wet, and it's also cannot regenerate in the presence of frequent fire. So it's relegated in nature to sites that do not burn frequently. Of course, when the fire frequency in the surrounding landscape is altered, it can invade quite a bit, but so that's slash pine. Also, it's native east of the Mississippi River, though it's been widely planted in the West. Loblolly, probably one of the loblolly along with sweet gum and water oak. It's one of the most abundant trees in our landscape. Needles are 3 per fascicle. And by the way, if you think about a fascicle of needles, the little where the needles are attached and kind of bundled, that grayish brown structure is actually another example of a determinate short shoot. And if you trace that back to where that's connected to the main branch or twig, you're also going to find a woody scale there. That woody scale is actually a modified leaf. It's called a primary scale leaf. But anyway, so 3 per fascicle, long-ish, on average, shorter than slash. Seed cones are a lot different. The seed cones are sessile rather than stalked. And they're also, instead of being, whereas slash has a nice waxy reddish brown look, the seed cones of loblolly are kind of a dull grayish brown, and they're also extremely prickly. The joke is to pick up a loblolly pine cone and say to your buddy in the field, "Hey, catch," and then throw it to him or her. So bark's a bit different. With slash, you get more of an orangey undertone, a little bit more cinnamony, reddish with lob. And like slash pine, loblolly pine is a mesophyte. Well, actually, it's a mesophyte, not a hydrophyte. Slash is a hydrophyte in nature. But they're both slash and loblolly are fire tender. They cannot regenerate in the presence of frequent surface fire. Longleaf pine can. It's ready for that, but lob and slash cannot. All right, red maple, getting into the flowering plants. So red maple is deciduous, leaf arrangements opposite. Complexity is simple. And the blades are palmately lobed, like the fingers on your hand radiate from your palm, palmately lobed. Red maple undersurfaces tend to be kind of silvery white. This is a mid-sized tree, kind of a medium gray bark. Maples are also dioecious, so you have male flowers, staminate flowers on one tree, and pistillate flowers, female flowers on another. Et cetera, et cetera. So I've just kind of gone with Acer rubrum. You're probably familiar with swamp red maple or Drummond. This is a species of wet swales in bottomland hardwoods and also in and around cypress tupelo swamps. So very wet-sided. And also the leaves of Drummond are really densely hairy, tomentose. Whereas the nominate variety rubrum is more of a mesophyte, likes it moist but not too wet. So red maple, opposite simple, and palmate. Those are some pretty key characters. And the fruit in the old literature, that key-like structure, at one point in time we would have called that a double samara. Now samara is just basically a simple anachene with a wing on it. But these days, more technically, it's a samaroid schizocarp. It's a fun name. All right, sugarberry, another super dirt common tree. Another deciduous tree. Unlike maples, it's alternate leaf arrangement, alt simple. The leaf shape, which I don't know if I have on here, the leaf shape is, if you look at these down here, it's widest below the middle, and it's relatively slender, kind of like the tip of a spear, so it's lanceolate. So lanceolate, the margins vary from entire to coarsely serrate like this. Bark is, of course, really unique. It's got some similarity to red maple in being kind of a medium gray and a smooth background anyway, but to varying degrees, you're always going to have these little corky warts on it, usually to various degrees. So all simple, deciduous. The fruit's kind of an orangey red drupe. Some other distinctive features, and this may not show it the best, but there's a little bit of asymmetry to the base here. We kind of bulging out on that side, and it's doesn't quite come down as far on the petiole on that side. So asymmetrical leaf base. All right, green ash. So green ash, ashes in general, have bark that is ridged and furrowed, and the ridges interlace or are braided, forming a diamond pattern. You know, those corky ridges interlacing to form a diamond pattern. That feature, in combination with opposite leaves and branching, that's going to identify an ash most of the time. So ashes have compound leaves. They're pinnately compound. So pinnate means like a duck's feather. So with the compound leaf of ash, we got the petiole. The blade is outlined here. We got the rachis, and then we have leaflets emerging from two sides of the rachis like a duck's feather, so pinnate. So green ash is a hydrophyte, fact wet, common bottomland hardwood species, but it's also present on older landscapes like hardwood flatwoods, like around Baton Rouge and where that really flat formation outcrops called the prairie terrace. It's really flat when you get fertile soils. And it does have some rudderol tendencies, so it's kind of weedy. All right. Had written midterm exams for dendrology this week, and as a bonus, I had everybody list their favorite tree that we've covered so far, and most of them said honey locust. So honey locust is a cool looking tree. The bark is kind of peeling off in these stiff plates. The term for that is revolute bark. I was asking students to compare some plant traits to everyday objects, and some people said it looked like burnt naan bread or pizza bubbles, but I don't know. So alternate leaf arrangement. The leaves most leaves on a given plant are going to be twice compound, so bipinnately compound. And of course, the wicked branch thorns on the stems and twigs. And the fruit is a legume or a pod, really long, kind of has a lax coiling effect to it, so it's kind of spiraling. And it's a mesophyte with a ready wetland status of fat. All right, swamp black gum, Nyssa biflora. So Nyssa biflora is an obligate wetland plant. You tend to get it in isolated wetlands called gum ponds. It's also it's one of the definite dominant species of a habitat that you would have up on the North Shore called the Bayhead Swamp. You will find this intermixed with cypress, tupelo, Carolina ash in your typical big river swamp as well. So it's deciduous, alternate simple. Blades are variable, oftentimes elliptic. To me, the blades of swamp black gum kind of remind me a little bit of live oak. They're not thick and leathery like that, but I don't know, they just kind of have especially at a distance, kind of a live oak look. So this is a plant of forested wetlands, usually with a swollen base. The fruit's a drupe. So in the kind of maturing bluish in the fall, and if you were to crack into that, there's a really pretty sizable pit or an endocarp. So it's a drupe. All right, getting into some oaks. Cherry bark oak. One of the more prevalent oaks that we have on mesic fertile soils. So bottomland hardwoods, loess soils, LOESS, like Tunica Hills, and even in the EBR and East Feliciana, where you have a thinner loess mantle, you get a lot of cherry bark oak. So it likes moist, fertile soils. It gets really big. So oaks are alternate simple. Got some lateral lobe action, acute lobes with bristle tips. So the bristle tips are a red oak character. If you use your imagination, the bark looks kind of like black cherry, so it's really dark gray to blackish, ridged and furrowed. It's not loose. You can't go up and just pick off flecks of bark, but it's pretty well textured. Also note that the upper surface of the leaf, which is nice and lustrous, dark green, the lower surface is notably paler, a lot paler. So the leaves are kind of two-tone. Now I call this a solid mesophyte. The wetland indicator is FAC wet, which would indicate wetland leaning, perhaps in other. So this is a pretty narrowly distributed species in the southeast, but perhaps, I don't know. To me, it's a mesophyte. It doesn't really like its feet wet for long periods. All right, one that does like its feet wet for long periods is called Nuttall oak or Texas red oak. So it has some similarities to cherry bark oak. It's a red oak. So it has more or less acute lobes, bristle tips. I don't have a good picture of the bark, but it's more tight. It's like a medium gray instead of a really dark gray to black. If you're familiar with water oak, it's kind of in the same ballpark as water oak bark. It's really tight, maybe somewhat ridged and furrowed at the base, but generally if you stand back and look at it, it's pretty smooth. There's a nice business card trait on the acorns of Nuttall oak. So they're rather large and ellipsoidal, but this little projection right here that connects the cupule to the twig, that little projection is a business card trait. So if you just have the cupule in your hand, you can, it's Nuttall oak. So the acorns of Nuttall are a lot bigger than cherry bark oak. They're big and ellipsoidal, whereas cherry bark is about as long as it is wide, and we're talking maybe, I don't know, a third of an inch long, probably not quite a half, but different shape. And instead of having a deep bowl-shaped cupule, cherry bark is more like a shallow saucer type of thing. So again, so Nuttall oak is definitely a big river floodplain species. Cherry bark and Nuttall oak can occur on the same general area, in the same site, but they occupy different niches. If you have some topographic variation in a floodplain forest, you're going to find cherry bark oak on the higher sites and Nuttall oak on the wetter swales. And we have live oak. So live oak is familiar to all of us. If you look at the range map, it's actually, with the exception of this bulge in Texas, it's pretty coastal, pretty much a maritime species. So this shows a great deal of variation in live oak shape. You might have coarse teeth, irregular coarse teeth, but you don't have any regular lobing like you get on the other two oaks. So so live oak leaves are, as you know, are really thick, leathery. Technically, they're tardily deciduous. Most of the leaves of the previous year will get replaced when green up occurs the following spring. So technically, it's a flavor of tardily deciduous. So again, we're talking about oaks, so alternate simple. The bark of live oak definitely has some uniqueness. It's really dark gray, ridged, really heavily ridged and furrowed, deeply furrowed. The acorns are about maybe three quarters of an inch to an inch long. When they mature, it's going to be really, really dark brown, almost black. Also note the cupule. It's the word, it says turbinate. So the word turbinate means looking like an upside down cone. So it kind of looks like I guess I don't know, like a snow cone, the bottom paper part. I haven't seen those in a long time, but anyway. So it's like an upside down cone. So it's FAC up, so pretty much, you know, upland leaning. You get them on coastal hammocks, which are just higher elevation sites, natural levees, etc. All right, so getting into the dewberries, southern dewberry. So this is our first, I guess our only, I should have maybe thrown in some more shrubs, but anyway, so southern dewberry is a shrub, technically. It's kind of vine-like in that the stems are kind of creeping, trailing, kind of scrambling along the ground. It'll climb up and over low-lying vegetation and stumps and logs and things, but it's really not climbing. So let's just call it a trailing shrub. Leaf arrangement's alternate, and we have some variation in the leaf complexity that we haven't had in the other ones, and that is that the leaves, which if I draw the outline here, the leaves are palmately compound. So the leaflets radiate from a central point. Also, we have nice little cat claw prickles, and in between the prickles, we have numerous kind of bristly reddish to purplish hairs. So we can confidently say that southern dewberry is armed, so possesses prickles. So those are just a brief kind of a refresher on those taxa. So this is our blank character matrix. So at this point, and I'll say one other thing before we get started, our next task is to code the matrix. Well, first we have to come up with characters. I guess to interact with this, I gotta, can everybody still see that okay? All right. I didn't think I can't be in slide mode. Okay. So this is our blank matrix. We're gonna have to come up with a few characters here just to help us organize information. One thing I'll say for starters for start off, what do bald cypress, slash pine, and loblolly pine have in common with each other that makes them different from all the other taxa?
So Chris, you want answers in chat?
Well, I guess just pipe up and say something audibly, if that works. Let's see, where's...
Yeah, so you're welcome to unmute yourself or to put it in chat and I will interpret for you. So we've got a response from Donna. She says cones.
Yeah, so, oh shit, I just typed into that. Bald cypress, slash pine, and loblolly, they are all gymnosperms, and more specifically, they're all conifers.
Okay.
So before we code this matrix, just note that we might have some, we might have some gaps here because so normally what we would do is put all conifers or all gymnosperms in one pool, deal with them separately. Everything else here is an angiosperm, a flowering plant. So this is.
We say needle-like leaves also.
Yeah, that's inaccurate. So they're all gymnosperms. So just with that in mind, when you think about characters, don't put a whole lot of time into these guys. We're going to deal with those three, especially. You'll see what I mean. All right. So to get the ball rolling, does anybody want to throw out a character that would vary among, especially our flowering plant taxa? Let me check chat. Where'd chat go? I'll try and monitor chat as well. But if anybody wants to pipe up.
So leaf shape, color.
Hmm.
So Camilla says leaf arrangement.
So yeah, when it comes to character selection, when we're in the initial stages, when we're just kind of developing ideas, we want characters that are really straightforward, that don't have a lot of complex variation, because we can't conveniently across all these species describe that. So I'm going to go with leaf arrangements. So oops, leaf arrangements. So let's go ahead and be thinking about some other characters, but we can go ahead and code this. So what's the leaf arrangement of red maple?
Opposite.
Opposite simple.
All right, so the arrangement is opposites.
Okay.
Sugarberry.
I want to guess that they're all opposite. No, they're all alternate except green ash.
Okay. So talk on it. Alternate. Green ash. You're saying that's opposite?
Yeah. Somebody correct me. Speak up.
All right. Honey locust.
Alternate.
Swamp black gum.
Alternate.
All right. All the oaks are alternate. We've established that. Live oak, alternate. Dewberry.
Alternate.
Alternate.
Okay, technically alternate. We're going to go with fascicle. Leaf arrangement in pines really doesn't have any meaning, and they're all just bundled together at the tip of that determinate short sheet. So that's T. All right, complexity. Basically, let's just say simple or compound.
Simple, red maple.
All right. Sugarberry.
Simple.
Green ash.
Compound.
Honey locust.
Compound.
Swamp black gum.
Simple.
Cherry bark oak.
Simple.
Simple. Southern dewberry.
Compound.
Compound.
Shoot. How much time do I have for this, by the way? An hour?
Yes.
We got 10 minutes left.
Yes.
Oh, crap.
Go ahead. It's okay.
All right. All right, let's finish this off. Technically simple, and I'm just going to put NA. Nobody ever thinks about that for NA. So armed. So one thing with something like that, a presence absence, you can do 0, 0. Honey locust is heavily armed. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Oops. 1, 0, 0, 0. All right. Due to time, I'm gonna just kind of cut it here. We could probably come up with some other stuff, but hopefully the kind of direction we're going here. And again, the reminder, the whole point of doing this is to help organize information. So I'm gonna stop share briefly. I'm gonna share a Word document. And I'm gonna briefly, yeah, bear with me here. Share screen, Word. All right, let me bust up the, so hopefully you have your notebook and at least the list of taxa. Call that 1 prime. All right. So if you look at those groups, if you look at the plants, you can do one of two things. You can split that group into two groups. You can make a dichotomous split, Or if there's a species or maybe one or two species in there that really, really stick out among the rest of them, we could deal with those. So I'll go ahead and drive, but if somebody wants to throw something out here, we can pick on the oddballs, or we can, maybe, actually, I think in this case, we got to pick on the oddballs. So leaves, secular, don't want it, secular, more than, times longer than wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who am I picking on with that? Yeah.
So Chris, just to give you some encouragement, you've
Yes.
got people who are saying that they will stick with you for as long as it takes to create this.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, for the balance of the crowd, I guess I'll review it later when it's recorded, huh? Are you
Right.
sure you record this? Because
Yes.
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 Oh God. Okay. All right. Is the font size big enough? Can I drop it a tad?
I think it's good.
Can we go for longer? So about Caroline on the keys. Yeah, I can come up with a few ideas. All right, I'm gonna drop the font just a little bit. Okay, leaves a circular. Let's add another quantitative over 2 inches long. Actually, okay. Leaves. So at this point, all right. So leaves, a circular just means needle-like, over 2 inches long. So the quantitative add on at the end, more than 10 times longer than wide, that's pulled out of the air. It's arbitrary but useful. So I'm picking on the 2 pines right here. So that's our first pick on. So what I can do, so this, I got 2 choices here. So leaves not a circular. If I can try and match it, or I can do the pre-approved cop-out. You see this all the time in keys, not as above or not with the above combination of characters. So 2 prime. Actually, let's do this. All right, I'm gonna promise not to make this or do my best not to make this a total Charlie Foxtrot. So, all right, 2 prime. Damn it. Yeah, I really hate that you're recording this. Okay. So we have a pool of 12 taxa. We have 3 conifers in the mix. 2 of those conifers have really long needle-like leaves that are bundle and fascicles. So they're very unique, the 2 pines. So of that pool of taxa, we're gonna pick on those first. So we pulled those out by saying leaves acicular. Well, let's just say it in English. Needle-like, over 2 inches long, which is an arbitrary limit, but it's accurate. Those, anyway. So leaves needle-like over 2 inches long, and I could throw that out if I wanted to, but we'll just leave it for the time being. All right, slash pine and loblolly pine. What unambiguous characters do you want to use to separate slash and loblolly pine? I know you don't have the benefit of seeing the slides again, so
A sessile cone or an attached cone.
Did you get that, Chris? Sessile versus attached cone?
Yep. All right. Seed cones, sessile. Seed cones, stalked. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When writing this key, it's just good to get into a habit of putting yourself in the position of a user. Even today, I use some botanical keys that I just want to throw out the window. That's normal. Ambiguities, overlapping character states. If you have to if you have ranges like leaves 1.9 to 2.3 centimeters long, and then your alternative is 1.7 to 2.1 centimeters long. What if the one you measure is 2.0 right on the nose?
Mhm.
Now the taxonomist that measured 1,000 leaves, who wrote that treatment, will know the probabilities, but that's a difficult position. So there's actually a joke about keys. Keys are written by people who don't need them for people who can't use them. So when you're writing keys, put yourself in the place of the user in terms of being user friendly. I want to underscore this: use multiple characters, especially when you get closer, when you get further into the key. A big split like leaf arrangement, alternate versus opposite. That's something that's evident pretty much at all seasons of the year. So, you don't have to, you would be writing a paragraph if you tried to account for all the variation in each broad group. So multiple character states, definitely use multiple character states. So let me get back to sharing the Word file. So with multiple character states in mind, we have a good one: seed cones, sessile and loblolly, stalked and slashed. And what if you don't have seed cones at your disposal, or you can't really see how they're attached? Then what do you do? So what else?
The number of needles per fascicle.
Okay. So needles consistently 3 per fascicle, rarely 2. So you're always going to have oddballs here and there. So with loblolly, they're going to be in 3s. You might, 1 out of 50, you might get 2. 3 per fascicle. Needles regularly 2 and 3, regularly occurring in 2 and 3 per. Actually, I like the shorter version. 2, 3 per fascicle. Color of bark. Somebody suggested on the chat. So beware with colors. You can line 10 people up and look at slash pine bark and loblolly bark, and they may not see the same things. But we're going to use that, and it's worth using because maybe it resonates with somebody. And if it doesn't, these semicolons here, you got options. So let's say enter bark reddish versus oops, orange-ish, if that's a word. Now, let's see, color bark. Ecology is, well, ecology doesn't have a whole lot of meaning because both of these species have really wide ecological ranges. Neither can regenerate with frequent fire. So in a really pristine site, slash pine is going to be relegated to the edges of a bayhead swamp or something. And lob is going to be relegated to maybe a hummock in a bayhead, or we will not mess with ecology at the moment. I don't remember the exact range and length. They do overlap. So this is going to be an overlapping character state. So, and again, I'm not claiming that this is from the literature, but around 4 to 7 inches long. Leaves 4 to, they overlap. I don't remember let's see, I'm gonna actually go 3 to 7 and probably 4 to, let's see, 4 to 9, 5 to 9, something like that. I'm pulling that off the top of my head. I'd have to look at, but anyway, bottom line is they do overlap. So if you had that alone and you had an intermediate value actually observed, then, so we have a pretty generous offering here, slash pine. So just to go back over our work here, starting at the first couplet, leaves need alike, over 2 inches long. Lob and slash are always pretty going to easily be over 2 inches long. So that pulls out the pines. So we have seed cones sessile versus stalked, 3 per fascicle versus 2 or 3, etc. Each semicolon, you can read that as an or. If a key means and, like a combination of characters, it will say and. But interpret a semicolon here and elsewhere as meaning or. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have 4 characters referenced. Note how 2 here and 2 prime completely oppose each other. That's really important in key structure. We don't want to talk all about this and then come down here and not even refer to the same characters, because that just wouldn't make any sense. All right, leaves not as above. So we've eliminated 2 of the 12 taxa that we've dealt with. We've treated those, the 2 pines. Who's next? So while you're thinking about that, I'm going to go back to our matrix. So I know we didn't get too far in the matrix. That's okay. We still have 2 biggies right here. Leaf arrangement, to me, that is the best frontline character to throw at anything. Today in the dendrology quiz, I gave students Chinese privet, which has opposite leaves, and deciduous holly, which has alternate leaves. I had a lot of people calling Chinese privet deciduous holly and vice versa because they were eyeballing and not paying attention to the leaf arrangement. So is everybody okay with proceeding with leaf arrangement as our next character?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we can go straight up leaf arrangement. We do have kind of an oddball here left in bald cypress. So leaves alternate, born 2 ranked on determinate short shoots. So the short shoot itself is the feathery like thing. Think about bald cypress, the little feathery thing. So leaves alternate, born 2 ranked on determinate short shoots, conifer. Of course, so are the pines, but we've done with the pines. We're done with those. So cypress. So now with 3 prime, we have to counter that. So leaves all, and it's going to be one of those. We could do the pre-approved cop-out, which is leaves not as above or without the above combination of characters. We can try and counter it directly, which I'll do. So leaves opposite or alternate. If alternate, then born on long shoots, angiosperm. So I think we've countered that. So now we can go on to 4. So does that make sense? Couplet 3, we dispensed with, we've treated bald cypress. 3 prime, we could have been, leaves not as above again. Nothing wrong with that. Since 3 is really specific. Use alternate linear CA 1-inch long. Born 2 ranked undeterminate short shoots. Bald cypress. Does that make sense? Sit well with everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So 3 down, 9 to go. Now I'm gonna stop sharing. All right, I like leaf arrangement. So we've dealt with these. So if we look at the variation across leaf arrangement, if there's no variation, it's really not a helpful character, but we do have variation. We have 2 tacks of red maple and green ash that have opposite leaves. The balance, the rest are alternates. So I propose we start off with the 2. Again, this is kind of I guess I'll call it the pick on the oddball approach.
Yeah.
No offense to the oddballs, but anyway, I mean to the ash and maple. But so back to, all right, so 4 leaves. All right, so now we're gonna have to make the big split between leaves. Oops, leaves opposite. 5. And then we're going to come back out here for prime. Alternate. So 5 and 5 prime. All right, how do you want to split red maple from green ash?
They're simple or compound.
All right. Leaves simple. Leaves. What else? Kind of like so bark can be hard to deal with, especially when you have, when you get down to where you're looking for tiebreakers between 2 species, you can pick on bark pretty reasonably, especially with these 2. Oops, got a chat going on here. Pinnate or palmate. So the leaf blades of red maple, they are simple in that they're all one continuous unit, but they are palmately lobed. So it's not like palmately compound versus pinnately compound. We're looking at simple versus compound. What we could do is, for the benefit of the user, we could say palmately lobed, but we're still looking at a simple leaf, palmately lobed.
Yeah.
And then we can say pinnately compound. Let's pick on bark. So bark, light to medium gray, smooth, often with irregular vertical cracks. Bark ridged and furrowed, the ridges forming a conspicuous diamond pattern. Does that look all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we picked on leaf complexity of this or that. We picked on bark. Anything else come to mind where, yeah, anything else come to mind? I guess in the old days, it's, like I said, botanically, the fruit, why do you have, okay, I got a question on chat. Why do you have bark included with leaf? So each lead, so this is, so we have 5 and 5 prime. So these are opposing leads. We have multiple characters referenced here, and each character is separated by a semicolon. So we have leaves, bark. What we're doing with using multiple characters per leaf is we're giving the user of a key, whether it's yourself or somebody else, options. What if leaves aren't evident? You can always infer leaf arrangement because the branching pattern betrays the leaf arrangement. But you may not have leaves, but you might have bark in the wintertime, so we're going to pick on bark. So hopefully that makes sense here. The reason why we have multiple characters referenced in each lead is to provide a generous selection of characters to use, for your user. So we've referenced leaves, we referenced bark. We could reference fruit. So fruit, a bright red, definitely a bright red.
Yeah.
Samaroid schizocarp resembles. This is what in the old days we would call a double Samara. Let's just put double Samara in quotes. All right, I think we got that one good. Red maple. Green ash fruit, when it's pretty much mature, it's kind of brown, light brown tan. Fruit, a light brown single wing Samara paddle shaped. And I'll do another key. Damn it. Key shaped. All right, so I think we've been plenty generous on this one. Green ash. So how does that grab you?
Good, good.
All right. Okay, I got a question on chat. How do you handle non-dichotomous characteristics? You do in a dichotomous key, occasionally you will have triplets. So instead of 5 and 5 prime, you might actually have 3 number 5s. You tend to see this sparingly, but you tend to see it like at the end of a key where it's just down to the last few, and sometimes that's just a bit more straightforward. So there's no law against having a third number 5. So as we proceed, I'll try and incorporate an example of that. So there's nothing wrong with that. It does happen. What you want to avoid is having a combination of like more than 3 leads per quote unquote couplet, and having characters the characters that you refer to in those leads not oppose each other. I guess that has some limited value, but it really totally deviates from the whole format here. So far we've eliminated our pines. Those are the most unique species of the group, and having the long, fascicle needles. Bald cypress, which was also pretty unique, we treated it, and in 3 prime, we kind of we could have inserted here. We could have just said not as above. Again, that's a pre-approved cop-out. And so leaves opposite. We dealt with our 2 opposite leaf species. So let's see, fold these up real quick. Doggone it, I'm sorry about the time, folks. If you got to bail. Unfortunately, this is being recorded, and I'm like cussing and basically a train wreck here. Okay, leaves alternate. All right, so that's going to send us to number 6. Let's just go to a different page. So 6. All right. Alternate leave taxa. So stop sharing, share the incomplete matrix here. Oops. Okay. All right, we've dealt with maple ash. So where do you want to go from here? Complexity is the next logical step. We do have 2 species that are armed, and if you're a fan of the pick on the oddball approach, you might say armed versus unarmed. Does that sound like a good way to go?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Stop share. All right. That's armed with forms, goals. 7, 7, and 7 prime. All right. So our 2 armed plants are southern dewberry and honey locust. How do you want to split those apart? There's quite a bit to pick on.
The
Long thorns versus small bristles.
Armed with branched thorns. All right, semicolon. Armed with cat claw prickles. Good. What else?
so we can switch characters, right?
You can add characters. Every time you see a semicolon, that means or. So
Okay,
go ahead.
So the dewberry would have the white 5-petaled flower.
Okay. Go with that. What about the honey locust?
I don't know. In the
So-
chat, you've got a bunch of information. So I don't know if you can look at that. Tree form versus trailing shrub.
Okay, we're gonna circle back around to corolla, but sure. Large tree, trailing shrub. So just a little note, and it doesn't apply here because rubus triv, it's a trailing shrub. It's pretty obvious. But if you have, say, a tree, a species that is a tree ultimately, comparing it to an upright shrub, just beware that sometime in the life stage of every large tree, it's going to look like a shrub. So don't hang your hat on tree versus shrub. You can include it, but add supplementary characters. So every tree is going to look like a shrub at some point in its development. All right. So large tree, trailing shrub, corolla. So honey locust is in the tribe, the legume tribe that includes cassia, Camocrista, stuff like that. So the corolla is, it's not typical pea corolla like papilionaceous. It's actually, but it is zygomorphic. It's bilaterally symmetrical. So corolla, cream colored, if memory serves, bilaterally symmetric, as opposed to corolla, white, radially symmetric. What else?
Donna is saying that the one would be a legume.
Okay. Growth
The
habit.
The honey locust.
All right. So fruit, a legume, a legume, fruit, a legume to 18 inches long. Fruit and aggregate of drupes.
Yeah.
What about the leaves?
Someone earlier, let's see, Carolyn said pinnate or palmate.
Perfect. Yeah. Leaves pinnately compound once and twice. Leaves palmately compound. All right. So then dewberry. I think we got a lot to pick on here. So we need a locust. Now, just a note, what we are doing is an exercise with a small group of taxa. And if you were treating all the woody plants of St. Annie Parish, or a larger pool, you're probably not going to have a tiebreaker between something as different as honey locust and southern dewberry. But doing this exercise, it gets you thinking about characters, and as your pool of taxa, as you start to, if you develop something like this on your own, that pool of species will gradually grow and get more diverse. You're going to have other things that are going to pop out next to honey locust or next to rubus. So I think we beat that one to death pretty good. We got lots to pick on here. So they're both armed and lots of differences. So that's good. That looks good. Straightforward, unambiguous. So 2 more are down. So 6. So we're going to oppose that. So plants unarmed. 8. All right, so we've knocked out 3 conifers, 2 opposite leaf species. So we only got 5 left. So we got 3 oaks, sugarberry, and Nissa biphora,
Black gum, yeah.
black gum. So sugarberry, black gum, live oak, cherry bark oak, and nuttall oak. How do you want to proceed there? And just to reiterate, so it's actually, in dealing with a small group of species that are so crazily different, that actually makes this a more difficult process than if you were, say, treating just oaks or just pines or just a group of species that are where the differences are really more finer. So
Yeah.
um,
Deciduous.
so about leaf persistence.
Mhm.
Let me think. What do we got in there? I gotta jot down something here. So, in relative to leaf persistence, live oak's the most unique.
Yeah.
So leaves, tardily deciduous. On top of that, they are thick, leathery.
Yeah.
Entire to irregularly coarsely toothed. Bark, dark gray, deeply furrowed.
Yeah.
I have a cop out. I feel a cop out coming on. Okay, so this might be a good time for the word "and." Again, writing a key to such different taxa that it's a worthwhile exercise, but it does add a bit of challenge just dealing with so few taxa that differ substantially. So these tardily deciduous, persisting through winter, falling as new leaves emerged. Thick, leathery, entire, blah, blah, blah. Dark gray. Okay. Question. We could do without the above. And I don't like, it looks like a really bad run-on sentence. Okay. I'm going to try and just counter it directly. It leaves deciduous, thin, not thick, and leathery. Entire. That covers a lot of ground. Because remember, we got oaks. Yeah, we got the other oaks that are lobed. We got sugarberry, which can be coarsely serrate. Shit. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, this is a time for, since we used and above, without the above combination of characters. Yeah, I know, it's a cop out. Botanists do it all the time. So that's pretty clunky in there, I'll admit it. But we are dealing with a small group of, this is a pretty challenging thing. So live oak, we have with some degree of satisfaction, maybe we've dealt with it. All right, we got sugarberry, nuttall, cherry bark, and black gum. I can think of a couple of things with those. How do y'all want to split those? It would make sense to split the two oaks off together. So what are the two oaks have that sugarberry and black gum do not have? Or how are they?
Acorns. So the oaks have acorns.
Okay, so we can pick on fruit, a nut with subtending cupule, which is actually derived from the stalk of the flower of fruit, the pedicel cupule. Normally people just call that an acorn. Fruit and acorn. And
Deanna also says something about the bristle tips on the leaves for the red oaks.
Okay. Before we get to bristle tips, just thinking about the leaf outline, how do the two oaks differ from sugarberry and black gum? They're lobed. So pronounced lateral lobing on the oaks. We could pick on that. So with the fruit characters, so the oaks, they have acorns. So, and the alternative that for the other two, both black gum and sugarberry have fleshy fruits. Specifically, they have drupes. So, a nut versus a drupe, that's a good split. Leaves laterally lobed. The lobes laterally lobed. The lobes at least 1/3 the length. Let's just say laterally lobed. I was going to try and get all quantitative, but laterally lobed. So as opposed to leaves unlobed, but toothed. Well, let's just say unlobed. Well, toothed or entire. All right, so fruit, we got leaves lobed versus unlobed. Those are the two best options I got. Trying to think of so a little note about oaks. If you ever look into an oak tree, I can't really have tested this with something like live oak, but often you're going to see a weird branching pattern. You'll see branching patterns that might suggest that they are whorled, like a whorled pattern. So with oaks, you have a true terminal bud, and at the tip of the growing season's twig, you're going to have a lot of congestion. So you're going to have a lot of nodes with leaves and axillary buds. Those axillary buds are going to become shoots in the following year. So you get this crazy branching pattern, but let's not go there. Let's just rest on our laurels here. So 10. All right, so now we're going to deal with the 2 oaks. Now, there's a good bit to pick on here. So save some time and the fact that I can't share multiple stems. So, you know, ecology can be a moving target, but we can use it. If it's really obvious, we can hang our hat on it, but as a sole character, but you know, usually that's rare. But one thing we do about cherry bark, mesophyte versus nut all oak is a hydrophyte. Leaves, hairy, or let's say leaf under surface, hairy throughout. Leaf under surfaces, glabrous, save the tiny tufts of hairs and leaf vein axils. Cherry bark oak, acorn, up to CA 3.5 inches long, about as long as wide. Acorns, up on it, one's ellipsoidal. Let's see, to CA 1 inch long, about twice as long as wide. We got a lot to pick on here. So we can call off the dogs, we can keep going. Could also reference the fact that cherry bark oak, the lower surface is noted much paler than the upper surface, whereas that contrast is not as great in nut all oak. So I think mesophyte, leaf under circle, blah, blah, blah. So what do we got here? Cherry bark oak. Nut all oak. Does that sit all right with everybody? Fold. Fold. All right. So these unload. So this is going to take us to 11. We're down to our last 2. All right. 11 prime. Sugarberry and swamp blackout. Any ideas?
Bark is very different in those.
Yeah, bark is a good thing to pick on. I'm going to take a shot at the ecology here, occurring in pond swamps and bayheads, OBL, versus occurring in BLH, flatwoods, music-rich uplands, fact wet. We acknowledge that unless your plant that you're trying to identify, you know, if you're standing in a gum pond or a bayhead, then that's helpful. But if you're not, then it's not so helpful. All right, bark. Bark, corky, ridged, furrowed, medium gray. Bark, smooth, light gray with corky warts. I don't know if I did a great job in separating those two, but certainly sugarberry bark is unique. Leaves, generally elliptic.
One is toothed.
Leaves, lanceolate, generally elliptic. Margins entire. We have to put a disclaimer. So yeah, generally entire for swamp black gum. Occasional irregular teeth. Oops. Now for sugarberry, we have to put the same disclaimer. So you look at all the leaves on a crown of a fairly large sugarberry tree, and they're all entire. You look at a seedling sapling on the edge somewhere, you can have coarsely serrated. So there's some overlap there. Leaves lanceolate, but the shape is not a bad. Margins entire or uniformly coarsely serrate. Fruit type, fruit and oblong, dark blue drupe. Fruit a roundish orange red drupe. Sugarberry. Good Lord, I'm taking so long. I'm sorry, folks. So to wrap things up, the character matrix is not something that you always have to do. The character matrix is helpful for organizing information, especially when you input it in Excel and you can do some sorting, and it just helps you brainstorm. When it comes to writing a key, the big things to remember are to make sure your leads actually oppose each other. Now, the approach we took here, what I call the pick on the oddball approach, when it comes to addressing a pool of taxa, it's I like the approach of just taking the most unique taxa, treating them first, and then getting on to the more, the main bunch of species. So I'm going to save this and send it to Janelle. So this process, beneficial. It's very beneficial when you're learning plants because it gets you thinking about actual characters, and it gets you more of in an evidence-based mindset. It's always better, like I said, they're going to be species that you're going to be able to, you don't have to think about them, them. But in the process of learning and to help yourself learn, I like this approach a lot because it gives you, it makes you think about characters. And also when you're going through, when you get down to, a particular group of species, it really makes you think of not only the characters themselves, but you start to think about variability within a particular character, overlap. We all want non-overlapping character states, but sometimes, it's not always possible. So with that, if there are any final questions, I'll address those. Otherwise, Janelle, I'd recommend not recording and publishing this because it's probably.
I won't. So I won't publish it, Chris. I understand completely. But I do want to acknowledge your hard work and the value of this tool because you've dealt with the species that we commonly encounter in our workshops. It's so valuable to be able to do this. And then finally, we don't need to use these vocabulary words, right? We can just describe what we know.
Certainly, yes. But the important thing is to do the descriptions, and learning the morphology is important. It's almost better it's almost better to spend time just focusing on patterns and morphology. And once you have an expanded vocabulary, I'm not saying go out and there are a lot of botanical terms, but I would start chipping away at them.
Yes.
But you can certainly describe things in just plain language.